Good morning to my fellow classmates, especially to our professor, Dr. Christine Nabor Ferrer. Today I am going to share to the class the theories of second language acquisition. First, we have the behavioral theory. What is the relationship of this theory to second language acquisition? So, this theory was believed to create a solid foundation for second language learners and their acquisition of English as a second language. Behaviorism was linked with the belief in the audiolingual approach, as with primary language learners. Behaviorism for second language acquisition focuses on forming habits of language through repeating, practicing, and phrases they hear, as well as the memorization of sentence patterns. So, who are the proponents of behavioral theory? First, we have B.F. Skinner, who is a focus on the primary language learners. We also have Robert Lado with respect to second language learning and behaviorism. So, what is the principle of behavioral theory? Young children imitate or mimic the sounds and language patterns heard around them. This mimicry elicits positive reinforcements, which could take the form of praise or simply successful communication of being understood. Children continue to repeat and practice these sounds and patterns in order to form habits of language. The environment the child lives in is very important for this theory. The quality and quantity of exposure to language and consistency of reinforcement shape the child's language development as well as behavior. So, what are the problems associated with this particular theory? The first problem, what we choose to imitate may be determined by something within the child rather than within the environment. The second problem, not all children imitate. Additionally, many of the things that children say reflect that they are using language creatively rather than imitating. Number three, imitation and practice alone cannot explain children's language developments. And number four, children pick out patterns and generalize ideas as well as structures. Behaviorism is not a sufficient explanation of children's more complex language acquisition, such as complex grammar. So, what are the implications for language teaching? This is about form focused versus content based. Behaviorism is very form focused. It focuses on the development of form and language patterns found in the English language. It was believed that forms similar to those of their first or primary language would be easier to connect. However, we have learned that this is something we cannot always predict accurately based on first language patterns. While second language learners draw on what they know, there is no real formula to predict behavior and success. The form focused formation of language habits and memorization may provide second language learners with the basic knowledge. However, teaching language in isolation without real context or meaning leaves the learning forming child like sentences and limits their learning. The rejection of this theory or the search for a more adequate explanation leaves us with the thought that form focused teaching may not be enough for second language learners. They need content based instruction with context and meaning rather than raw memorization and form. So I'm going to share a particular video.
We're going to talk a little bit about the behaviorist theory of second language
We're going to talk a
acquisition.
little bit about the behaviorist
And
theory of
first,
second
in order
language
to
acquisition.
understand this theory, we have
And
to take a little
first,
detour
in order to
and check out the
understand
underlying theory,
this theory, we have to
which
take a little
originally
detour
didn't have
and
much
check
to
out the
do with
underlying
language
theory,
at all.
which
We're talking
originally
about
didn't have much to
behavioral
do with language
psychology.
at all.
The
I'm
idea
talking
that
about
all
behavioral
actions, whether by
psychology.
man or animal, are
The
all
idea
learned
that all
behaviors and
actions,
can be
whether by
learned and
man or
unlearned.
animal, are all learned behaviors
So
and
the
can be
first thing a
learned
lot of
and
people
unlearned.
think about when they hear behavioral
So
psychology
the first
is
thing a lot of
Pavlov's
people think
dogs.
about when they hear
If you've ever
behavioral
taken an intro
psychology
to
is
psychology
Pavlov's
class,
dogs.
you'll probably
If
remember
you've ever
that
taken an
Pavlov
intro
was the
to
guy who
psychology
rang a bell
class,
every
you'll
time he fed
probably
his
remember
dogs.
that Pavlov was
And
the guy who
eventually,
rang a
the
bell
dogs
every
learned
time he
to
fed his
associate the
dogs.
sound of the bell
And
with food.
eventually, the dogs learned
And,
to
as a
associate the
result,
sound of the bell with
they
food.
salivated every time
And,
the bell
as a
rang,
result,
whether there was food
they
or not.
salivated every
In
time
a
the bell
nutshell,
rang,
Pavlov
whether there was
discovered
food
a
or not.
process in which a
In a
previously
nutshell,
neutral
Pavlov
stimulus
discovered a
came to
process in
evoke
which
a
a
specific
previously
response
neutral
by being
stimulus
repeatedly paired
came
with
to evoke
another
a specific
stimulus that
response by
evoked
being
the
repeatedly
response.
paired with another
And
stimulus
psychologists came
that
to call
evoked
this
the
classical
response.
conditioning.
And psychologists came
So
to call this
psychologists
classical
eventually
conditioning.
expanded on Pavlov's findings,
So
and the
psychologists
result was a new
eventually
type of
expanded
conditioning
on
called
Pavlov's
operant
findings,
conditioning,
and the result
a
was a
theory
new
that's
type of
usually
conditioning
attributed to an
called
American
operant
psychologist
conditioning.
named Skinner.
A theory that's
If a
usually
reward
attributed
or
to an American
reinforcement
psychologist
follows
named
the
Skinner.
response to a stimulus,
If a
then the
reward or
response becomes
reinforcement
more likely
follows
in
the
the future.
response to a
Makes
stimulus,
sense, right?
then the response becomes more
So
likely
what does
in the
all this
future.
have to do with
Makes
second
sense,
language
right?
acquisition?
So,
Well,
what does
in
all
the
this have
50s
to
and
do with second
60s,
language
it became
acquisition?
popular to apply
Well,
behavioral
in the 50s and
psychology
60s,
to all
it
types of
became
learning,
popular to apply
including language
behavioral
learning.
psychology to
Two
all types of learning,
psychologists most known for
including
applying
language learning.
behavioral psychology to
Two
learning, and
psychologists
especially
most
language
known for
learning,
applying
are
behavioral
Watson
psychology
and
to
the already
learning,
mentioned
and especially
Skinner.
language learning,
This
are
application of
Watson
behavioral
and the already
psychology
mentioned
to
Skinner.
language learning
This
eventually
application
led
of
to the
behavioral
behaviorist
psychology
theory
to
of
language
second language
learning
acquisition.
eventually led to the
So,
behaviorist
what
theory of second
exactly is the
language acquisition.
behaviorist theory of SLA,
So, what exactly
or
is the
second language
behaviorist
acquisition?
theory
Well,
of
take a
SLA?
look.
Or
The
second
foreign language
acquisition?
behavior
Well, take a look.
learner is the organism whose
The
behavior
foreign
is being
language
conditioned.
behavior learner is
The
the
behavior
organism
is
whose
verbal
behavior is
behavior.
being conditioned.
The stimulus is
The
what is
behavior
taught or
is verbal
presented
behavior.
of the foreign language.
The stimulus is
The
what is taught or
response is then
presented
the
of the
learner's
foreign
reaction
language.
to the stimulus.
The response is
And the
then the learner's
reinforcement is the
reaction
approval
to the
and praise of the
stimulus.
teacher and fellow
And
students,
the reinforcement
as
is
well
the
as
approval and praise
self-satisfaction.
of the teacher and fellow students,
Language mastery
as
is
well as
represented
self-satisfaction.
as acquiring a set of
Language
appropriate
mastery
language
is
stimulus
represented
response
as
chains.
acquiring a set of appropriate
So, with
language
this in mind,
stimulus
we can take a
response
brief
chains.
look at audiolingualism,
So, with this in
which is
mind,
the
we can
teaching
take a brief
method
look
that
at
originated from the
audiolingualism,
behaviorist theory
which
and
is the
focused
teaching
on language
method that
learning as mere
originated from
habit
behaviorist
formation.
theory and focused on language
So,
learning as mere
because
habit formation.
behaviorists and supporters of
So,
audiolingualism
because
viewed
behaviorists
language
and
learning as
supporters
habit
of
formation,
audiolingualism
dialogues
viewed
and
language
drills
learning
formed
as
the
habit
basis of
formation.
learning.
Dialogues
Dialogues
and
were used
drills
for
formed the
repetition
basis of
and
learning.
memorization, correct
Dialogues were
pronunciation,
used for
stress, rhythm,
repetition
and
and
intonation are
memorization,
emphasized.
correct pronunciation,
Furthermore,
stress,
one of
rhythm,
the
and
results of
intonation are
treating learning as
emphasized.
behavior was that
Furthermore,
meaning
one of the
was
results of
excluded
treating
from
learning as behavior
consideration,
was that
especially during
meaning
the
was
early stages.
excluded from consideration.
Because the focus was on
Especially
forming
during
a
the
habit,
early
it
stages.
really wasn't important
Because
for a
the
foreign
focus was
language
on
learner
forming a
to know
habit,
what
it
he or
really
she
wasn't
was
important
saying,
for a foreign
just that
language
it was
learner
being
to know
said
what
correctly.
he or she was saying.
And in the beginning
Just that it
stages
was
of learning
being said
via
correctly.
audiolingualism, the
And in the
focus
beginning
was on
stages of
oral
learning
language.
via audiolingualism,
Written language
the
wasn't
focus was
introduced
on
until
oral
more advanced
language.
stages of learning,
Written
because it was
language
thought to
wasn't
interfere
introduced
with
until
habit
more
formation.
advanced stages of learning, because it was
Also,
thought to
error
interfere with
prevention
habit
and
formation.
error correction was heavily
Also,
emphasized.
error prevention
In accordance
and
with
error
operant
correction was
conditioning
heavily
from behavioral
emphasized.
psychology,
In accordance with
correct
operant
responses should
conditioning from
receive
behavioral
positive
psychology,
reinforcement,
correct
and negative
responses should receive
responses
positive
received negative
reinforcement,
reinforcement,
and
thereby
negative
encouraging
responses
the desired
received
behavior.
negative reinforcement, thereby encouraging the
So,
desired behavior.
audiolingualism reached its peak in the 1960s,
So,
when it was widely used in
audiolingualism reached
classrooms
its
across
peak in
the
the
U.S. in the
1960s,
teaching
when it was
of
widely
foreign
used in
languages,
classrooms across
as well
the
as the
U.S.
teaching
in
of
the
English as a
teaching
second
of foreign
language.
languages, as
But
well as the teaching of
the
English as a second
popularity of the
language.
theory didn't last
But
for long.
the
Results
popularity
fell
of the
short of
theory didn't
expectations,
last for long.
and students were unable
Results
to
fell
transfer
short of
skills to
expectations,
real communication
and
outside the
students were
classroom.
unable to transfer
Plus,
skills
many
to real
students found the
communication
drilling,
outside the classroom.
memorization, and repetition
Plus,
to
many
be,
students
quite
found the
frankly,
drilling,
boring.
memorization, and repetition
Also,
to be,
in the
quite
late
frankly,
1960s,
boring.
linguistic theory
Also,
began to
in the
take a
late
different direction.
1960s,
Part of the reason reason for this is MIT linguist Noam Chomsky's
Part of the reason for this
rejection
is
of the
MIT
behaviorist
linguist
theory
Noam
of language learning.
Chomsky's rejection of the
Language
behaviorist
is not a
theory of
habit
language
structure,
learning.
Chomsky said.
Language
Ordinary
is not a habit
linguistic
structure,
behavior
Chomsky said.
characteristically involves
Ordinary
innovation,
linguistic behavior
formation of new
characteristically
sentences and
involves
patterns in accordance with
innovation,
rules of great
formation of new
abstractness and
sentences and
intricacy.
patterns in accordance with rules
Chomsky
of great
argued that
abstractness
much of
and
human language
intricacy.
use is not
Chomsky
imitative
argued
behavior.
that much of human
Instead,
language
it's
use is
created
not imitative
from
behavior.
underlying knowledge of
Instead,
abstract
it's
rules.
created from underlying
Even though the
knowledge
use of
of abstract
audiolingualism
rules.
has declined
Even
drastically
though the
since
use
the
of
60s, the
audilingualism
basic
has
premise of the
declined drastically
behaviors
since
theory
the
continues
60s,
to influence
the
many
basic
teachers'
premise
thinking
of the
about how a
behaviors
second
theory
language is
continues
learned.
to influence many
In
teachers'
fact, even
thinking
if you
about
didn't
how
go
a
to
second
school
language
back
is
in the
learned.
50s and 60s,
In fact,
you
even if
can
you didn't go
probably
to
still
school back
remember
in the
some
50s
teaching
and 60s,
strategies that your classroom
you can
teacher might have
probably still
used,
remember
like
some teaching
dialogue,
strategies that
repetition,
your
and
classroom
drilling,
teacher might have
that can
used,
be traced
like
back to the
dialogue,
behaviorist
repetition,
theory.
and drilling, that can be
So,
traced
in
back to the
conclusion,
behaviorist theory.
language learning for the
So, in
behaviorists is a
conclusion,
matter of conditioning
language
by
learning
means of
for the
imitation,
behaviorists is a
reinforcement,
matter of
and habit
conditioning
forming.
by means of imitation,
And although this
reinforcement,
theory
and
has its
habit forming.
shortcomings, it has some merits
And
as well,
although this
and
theory
still
has its
influences the
shortcomings,
teaching of
it has
second
some merits
languages in
as
some
well,
ways,
and still
though certainly
influences the
not to the
teaching of
extent that
second
it did when
languages
it
in
was
some
first
ways,
introduced.
though certainly not to the extent that it did when it was first introduced.
Okay, so we go now to the nativist theory. So, who are the proponent of this? As you can see, it is the famous Noam Chomsky. And we also have Lydia White. So, what's the principle of this particular theory? So, language is innate, it develops the same as any other biological functions. Chomsky believes that language is innate. Children are biologically programmed for language, and it develops the same as any other biological function. Like Skinner, Chomsky still attributes values to the environment, however basic, in the form of availability of people who speak to the child. Chomsky claims children could not develop such complex knowledge of a language, such as being able to distinguish between sentences that are grammatically correct and those that are not, simply by the examples of those around us, especially with the slang that people use with improper or unfinished sentences. Therefore, children are born with innate knowledge, or what you call the principles, universal grammar. All they need to do is to learn how to apply these particular principles. What's the problem with this particular theory? So this theory criticized for putting too much emphasis on the product at the end of the acquisition process rather than paying attention to the process itself. What's the relationship with second language acquisition theory? One theory is that universal grammar is available to individuals for both their primary language as well as second language learners. Some believe that universal grammar is exactly the same as with the first language, whereas others believe exists for second language learners but has been altered. Accordingly, secondary language development depends on the availability of the language in the learner's natural environment. However, at times, may need to have an explicit information. What's the implication for language teaching? It focuses on immersion rather than direct instruction in order to allow learners to develop complex abilities and develop an understanding of complex facets of language, such as grammar rules. It is important to note that while these theories primarily focus on content based learning rather than form learning for second language acquisition, it may be important at times to explicitly teach second language learners certain skills as well as certain rules. I'll be sharing to you a particular video.
Language sets us apart. Other animals
Language
communicate, but they
sets us
don't have
apart.
anything
Other
approaching the
animals
sophisticated
communicate,
grammar of
but they
human
don't have
languages.
anything approaching
How
the
is it that we
sophisticated
learn to
grammar of
speak and
human
think in
languages.
language so
How is
easily?
it that we learn
Young
to speak
children
and
become
think in
adept in a
language
new
so
language
easily?
very quickly.
Young children become adept
Since the
in a
dawn
new
of
language
philosophy,
very quickly.
thinkers have argued about whether or
Since the
not
dawn
we
of
have innate
philosophy,
ideas,
thinkers have
whether we are
argued about
born
whether or
knowing
not
things
we
as
have
Plato
innate
believed,
ideas,
or rather
whether we
as
are
John
born
Locke
knowing
and other
things as Plato
empiricists
believed,
argued,
or
the
rather as
mind is a
John
blank
Locke and other
slate on which
empiricists argued,
experience
the
writes.
mind is a blank
An American
slate on which
linguist, Noam
experience
Chomsky,
writes.
gave a twist to
An
this
American
debate in the
linguist, Noam
1960s
Chomsky,
by
gave a
demonstrating
twist
that
to this
children
debate in
learning
the
to speak
1960s
just don't have
by
enough
demonstrating
information
that
to
children
form the
learning to
complex
speak
grammatical
just don't have
maneuvers
enough
that
information
allow
to
them to
form the
generate
complex
unlimited
grammatical
new and
maneuvers
original
that allow
sentences.
them to
Yet
generate
they do so
unlimited
with
new and
ease.
original
There's a
sentences.
poverty of
Yet they do
stimulus.
so with ease.
Something else must
There's
be
a
going
poverty
on.
of stimulus.
Chomsky's
Something else
hypothesis
must be
was
going
that there
on.
are inborn structures in our
Chomsky's
brain,
hypothesis
what
was
he
that
called
there
a
are inborn
language
structures in our
acquisition
brain,
device, or
what he called
LAD,
a
which
language
gives us a
acquisition
natural
device, or
propensity to
LAD,
organize the spoken
which gives us
language
a
that we
natural
hear in various
propensity to
grammatical
organize the
ways.
spoken
Without
language that we
that, we
hear
couldn't
in
get
various
started as
grammatical
language
ways.
learners.
Without
If
that,
he's
we
right,
couldn't get
language
started as
structure
language
is
learners.
hardwired
If
as a
he's
kind
right,
of universal
language
grammar.
structure is
Our slates
hardwired
have
as a
been written
kind of
on
universal
before
grammar.
we emerged from
Our
the womb.
slates have been written on before we emerged from the womb.
Okay, so let's have the interactionist theory. So the proponent, as you can see, is John Piaget. We also have Lev Vygotsky, a Soviet psychologist. And we also have Norman Sikalowicz, J.R. Anderson, and Robert de Keyser. So what's the principle of this particular theory? Language acquisition is developed through the interaction of an individual and their environment, the people within it. Language acquisition is thought of as similar to and affected by the acquisition of the other cognitive skills rather than separate from other cognitive functions. Piaget believed that language is used to represent the knowledge that children have gained through interacting with their environment. Vygotsky believed that language and knowledge were interchangeable thoughts, or knowledge is internal language, and language is expressed in social situations, such as conversation. Conversations are the origin of thought and language. Both believe that interactions with the environment, objects, and people were important to development. Interpersonal sources of language, such as TV and radio, are not that sufficient. So, what's the problem of this theory? While all environments allow children to hear language that is meaningful to them, they may be lacking interaction with people. This theory is very well thought of as logical since there are only few criticisms directed toward this particular perspective. So, what's the relationship with the language acquisition theory? Second language learning is described in this theory as the build-up of knowledge through practice, exposure, and interaction, which can eventually be relied on for speaking and understanding. First, this development takes time and cognitive focus until development of the language allows recall to become automatic. Second language learners go through skill learning, first understanding and being able to engage in lower order thinking, the declarative knowledge, and through practice and interaction, slowing building their way to able to understand and engage in higher order thinking, or what we have the procedural knowledge. So, what is the implications for language teaching? Interactionists believe that you need to hear and practice language through interaction rather than test. In fact, if an individual in a test situation is focusing so hard on reading and understanding the words, they may forget the proper grammar or word order when attempting to respond. Second language learners should be immersed in the language, interact with their peers, group work is great. Perform skits or oral presentations of knowledge rather than pieces of writing right away. So I will be sharing you another video of this interactionist perspective.
There are some basic theories advanced to describe how language is acquired, learned, and
There are
taught.
some basic theories
The
advanced to
behaviorist
describe how
theory,
language is
mentalist
acquired,
theory or
learned,
innatism,
and taught.
rationalist theory, otherwise called
behaviorist
cognitive theory,
mentalist
and
theory or
interactionism
innatism,
are some of these
rationalist
theories.
theory, otherwise
In this
called
session,
cognitive theory,
let's talk
and
about the
interactionism are
interactionist
some of
theories,
these
or also
theories.
known as input
In
theories.
this session, let's
Input or
talk about the
interactionist
interactionist
theories.
theories or also known
In
as input
contrast to the
theories.
work of Chomsky,
Input
more
or
recent
interactionist
theorists have
theories.
stressed the importance of the
In
language input
contrast to the
children
work of
receive from their
Chomsky,
caregivers.
more recent theorists have stressed
Language
the
exists
importance
for the
of the
purpose
language
of
input
communication
children
and
receive
can only
from their
be learned in the
caregivers.
context of interaction with
Language
people who
exists
want
for
to
the purpose of
communicate with you.
communication and can only be learned in the
Interactionists
context
such
of
as Jerome
interaction with
Bruner
people who
suggest that
want
the
to
language
communicate with
behavior
you.
of adults when talking to children,
Interactionists such
known
as
by
Jerome
several
Bruner
names by
suggest
most
that the
easily
language
referred to as
behavior of adults when
child-directed speech
talking to
or
children,
CDs, is
known by
specially
several
adapted
names
to
by
support
most
the
easily
acquisition
referred to as
process.
child-directed speech or
This support
CDs,
is often
is
described
specially
as
adapted to
scaffolding
support
for the
the
child's
acquisition
language
process.
learning.
This
Bruner
support is
also
often
coined the term
described as
language
scaffolding
acquisition
for the
support
child's
system, or
language
LAS, in
learning.
response to Chomsky's
Bruner
lab.
also coined the term
Quennie
language
Trevarden
acquisition
studied
support
the
system or
interaction
LAS in
between
response
parents
to
and babies who
Chomsky's
were
lab.
too young to speak.
Quennie Trevarden
He
studied
concluded
the
that the
interaction
turn-taking
between
structure
parents
of
and babies who
conversation
were
is
too young
developed
to
through
speak.
games and nonverbal
He
communication
concluded
long
that the
before actual
turn-taking
words are
structure of
uttered.
conversation is developed
Limitations
through
of
games
input
and
theories.
nonverbal communication long
These
before
theories
actual
serve
words
as a
are
useful
uttered.
corrective to Chomsky's
Limitations of
early
input
position, and it
theories.
seems likely that a child
These
will learn
theories
more
serve as a
quickly with
useful
frequent
corrective to
interaction.
Chomsky's early position, and it
However,
seems
it
likely
has
that a
already
child will
been
learn
noted
more
that
quickly
children
with
in all
frequent
cultures
interaction.
pass through the same stages in
However,
acquiring
it
language.
has already been noted that
We have
children in
also
all
seen that there
cultures
are
pass through
cultures
the
in
same
which adults
stages
do
in
not
acquiring
adopt special
language.
ways of talking to
We
children,
have also
so
seen that there are
CDs may be
cultures in
useful
which
but
adults
seems
do
not to
not
be
adopt
essential.
special ways of talking to
As
children,
stated earlier,
so
the
CDs may
various
be
theories
useful
should
but
not be
seems not
seen
to be
simply as
essential.
alternatives.
As stated
Rather,
earlier, the
each of them
various
offers a
theories should
partial
not be seen
explanation of the
simply as
process.
alternatives.
The input or
Rather, each
interactionist
of them
theories.
offers a partial explanation of the process. The input or interactionist theories.
There are some basic theories advanced to describe how language is acquired, learned, and taught.
So this might surprise you, but one of the most amazing feats you will ever accomplish as a human being already happened. And that is language development. I mean, think about it. When you're a baby, all these sounds are coming at you, and somehow you're able to figure out which sounds are words, where there are breaks between the words, general grammatical rules, and you're able to apply them without any real formal training. This is amazing. So naturally, a lot of research has been done into how this ability develops, and I'm going to tell you about the three main theories that look at language development. So first, we start out with the nativist or innatist perspective. And what this perspective says is that children are born with the ability to learn language. And the main guy associated with this theory is Noam Chomsky. And he thought that humans had something called a language acquisition device, or LAD, in their brains that allowed them to learn language. And this isn't really supposed to be in a specific part of the brain. It's just an idea that this ability exists. And this works because he thought that all languages shared a universal grammar, or the same basic elements. So all languages would have nouns, verbs, things like that. So the language acquisition device enables the child to pick up on and understand those types of words and their organization within a sentence for any language. And this goes along with the idea that there's a critical period or a sensitive period. The critical period is usually thought to be from birth until about age 8 or 9, and it's the period of time in which a child is most able to learn a language. So if you try to learn a language after that age, it's a lot harder. It's not impossible, it's just a lot harder. And nativists like Chomsky would say that that's because the LAD only operates during that critical period. Once you start using it, then it specializes to your language and it becomes unable to detect other sounds and grammar from other languages. Second theory I want to tell you about is the learning theory. Learning theorists think that children aren't born with anything. They only acquire language through reinforcement. The learning theorist would say that a child learns to say mama because every time it makes a sound that kind of approaches that, so something, Then mom starts smiling, hugging the child. So over time, the child learns, oh, the more I make this sound, the more I get mom's hugs and smiles. And so then eventually it learns to say ma, and then say it again and learns to say mama. So this makes sense. But a strict learning theory doesn't explain how children are able to produce words they've never heard before or produce unique sentences. So we have another theory called the interactionist approach. Sometimes this is called the social interactionist approach because these theorists believe that biological and social factors have to interact in order for children to learn language. So they would say that children strongly desire to communicate with others, such as the adults in their lives, and that desire motivates them to learn to communicate via language. And the main theorist associated with this school of thought is Vygotsky. He was a big proponent of the importance of social interaction in the development of children. All three of these theories have made big contributions to our understanding of how children develop language. So the next time you look at a baby, be impressed. They're actually working really hard. So this might surprise.
So that ends my report. Thank you for listening po. Have a nice day ahead.